28 seconds.
27.
26.
25 seconds.
24. 23.
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
22 seconds.
19.
18.
17 seconds.
16.
15 seconds.
14.
13 seconds.
12. 11.
10 seconds. 9.
8.
7.
6.
What?
Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Hey, and welcome to Subspace Chatter, where we boldly go into discussing Star Trek. Today we'll be talking Star Trek with fan extraordinaire, Mr. Dan Madsen, the founder, publisher, and past president of the official Star Trek fan club. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Eve.
Awesome. Well, for those who are tuning in now or later, just so you know, this is my first time going it alone, so bear with me. I'm going to do the best I can.
You'll do just fine.
Thank you. So our first question that people submitted to us, Dan, was how did you feel about the early cancellation of the Enterprise series?
Oh, I was very disappointed because, to be honest, I really liked Enterprise. I know there's a lot of Deep Space Nine fans out there and Voyager fans, and I actually I think I enjoyed Enterprise even more than those shows, and I really felt like they didn't give it enough time. It was just kind of coming into its own right towards the end there before they canceled it, and so I just think there could have been so many wonderful episodes that would have gone on after they had canceled the show. So I was really disappointed in that one.
I'll admit I kind of agree because I grew up watching Quantum Leap. So
oh yeah, and I love Quantum Leap, and Scott Bakula is one of the nicest people I think I've ever met, and he is. I really wanted to see it, be successful for him.
Yeah, Enterprise for me was actually the first Star Trek I got to see as it came out because of my age. So.
Wow, that's kind of cool. That's interesting. Enterprise, I think, gets kind of left out. People kind of forget about it, but I still think, especially in the latter part of the season of the show, I think they were really hitting their stride, and unfortunately, they got canceled right when they were hitting their stride, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seems like they cut it off a little too soon because I know I enjoyed it. It was a really different look at Star Trek, and they had a really good cast. So
very good cast. Yeah, they're all such nice guys.
Yeah, I thought the show was brilliant. So I'm kind of hoping we eventually get to see maybe a whole Birth of the Federation thing myself.
Oh, I'd love that. Well, there's so many different Star Treks now. It's not unbelievable that there could be any subject matter regarding Star Trek now that could be done with the streaming services now, Paramount Plus. Back in the day, I'm an old school fan. I caught the original series in reruns. I didn't catch it when it first came on, but I caught it in all of its reruns, and it back then, the thought of there being more than one Star Trek show was unthinkable. I mean, and I can't tell you how many years, you'd hear the old phrase, bring back Star Trek lives, and everything. And if I could have transported myself into the future to see what the Star Trek franchise is like today, I don't think I would have believed it. With Star Trek movies and what 5-6 series, and it's mind-blowing to me. It's not anything I would have predicted back in the day.
Kind of like a Star Trek renaissance.
It is. There's no question about it.
So considering we had like a gap of time between the original series and TNG, and then we had a gap between Enterprise and Discovery, which has launched the current renaissance, how would you compare the fan reaction from your perspective to when TNG first came out and was announced to when Discovery was first announced and came out?
It's interesting. I'm very, very have very vivid memories of when Next Generation was announced. And, prior to the show coming out, Gene Roddenberry was doing updates with us for the official Star Trek fan club magazine. And, when he first started announcing who the crew members would be, this is before they were even cast. It's funny because I remember very clearly the Star Trek fans being very upset about the fact that this was going to be a Star Trek show without Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Because they were thinking, how can Star Trek be anything without those guys? And I remember the outrage there in the very beginning. And it took time for people to warm up to it. And then when Next Generation launched, at first, it took people a while to get used to Patrick Stewart being the new captain. But I think after the second season, it started hitting its stride, and that's when everybody started kind of coming on board and saying, you know what, this is pretty good. And then Next Generation kind of stood on its own. It was its own thing. And the only thing that different is that I think with Discovery, there was excitement and interest around it. But, there's been so many other Star Treks now that I didn't see, there wasn't the outrage of them doing something new with a different cast and all of that. I think people were just excited to see another Star Trek series. And so I think it was a different time because there wasn't the same, there was only one Star Trek before Next Generation came around. And when Discovery came around, I don't know. I've lost count. What is it? 5 different Star Trek series shows. I mean, were around. So, I think people were open-minded to seeing other Star Trek that didn't include the main 3 characters from the original show.
It's funny what you're saying about the resistance to a new cast that's not Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, because I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Ethan Peck, who is one of our current Spocks, and what a sweet and funny guy. Like what he was just awesome to meet for somebody like me who gets a little anxious. And I asked him, I said, is it very difficult coming to conventions knowing there's fans that are like, Leonard Nimoy is Spock? He actually said that, he actually did find that really like intimidating, that people would be like, Leonard Nimoy is Spock, you can't be Spock. So it was kind of funny you said that, because he says he's encountered a little bit of that too.
Well, it's interesting because, when they did when the first Star Trek movie came out with the new cast members playing the old characters, my first initial reaction when I heard they were going to do that was, oh, I don't do that. And then when I went and saw the movie, I thought, wow, you know what? Okay, these guys work. I can see that. I liked the movie, the first Star Trek film by J.J. Abrams. But I got to be honest, I think Ethan Peck's Spock is my favorite portrayal of him next to Leonard Nimoy. I mean, I even like him better than Zachary Quinto. I think Ethan Peck has done just a fantastic job. And what a nice guy on top of it. It always makes it nice when, the actor is a good person as well. But yeah, Ethan Peck, I'm sold on him. He's a great young Spock.
I'll agree with you there, especially after meeting him. Like I say, he's just absolute sweetheart, and he loves telling funny stories. Like he's about as un-Spock-like in person as
That's right. You're absolutely right. He's very un-Spock-like as a human being. But yeah, I mean, that makes his performance even more special. I just, the only thing I wish they didn't do is give him those big, long sideburns. I don't like those. Make the point, keep the point, but don't make it all the way down his cheek kind of thing. That still bothers me every time I see that.
For me, it was the initial beard in Discovery, because I'm like, when have we ever seen a Vulcan with a beard?
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, there's personal choices that you like and that you don't like. But for me, it's the sideburn, the sideburn thing going too far down. It's like, I keep wanting to go in there and just shave it, shorter. it doesn't work for me. But I don't know. Maybe other people really like it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just a design choice. It's hard to say.
Yeah, you're right.
So, how do you feel about multiple Trek shows overlapping like we have now with Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Lower Decks, similar to what we had in the 90s with the TNG DS9 Voyager? Do you think that having multiple Treks at a time is a good thing for the fans, or do you think it takes away from it?
It's a good question. If all of those shows are really well made and good and have very high quality, I think it's a good thing because it continues to keep the whole Star Trek franchise growing and evolving. However, if they get into a point where some or many of these shows become just kind of mediocre or not good at all, I think it can hurt the franchise because, it can be overkill. And, the one thing, and I would say the same thing about the Star Wars franchise as well, is that, producing too much of it sometimes makes things not so special. I kind of miss, as an old school fan, I kind of miss the days of the, when, you just had Next Generation and you had a movie, every 3 years or whatever. And it just, to me, I worry that it's like having your favorite food, but if you eat it every day, you're going to start not liking it as much. And I don't want Star Trek to become, just kind of mediocre, blasé. People kind of like, oh, you know what? I've got so much Star Trek, I don't really care anymore. I'll watch that, but I don't really care about the others. I want them to keep it special. And when you got so much being thrown at you, my concern is that it's not as special anymore. And so that's the one thing that concerns me about Star Trek and Star Wars, for that matter, as well. I think that, that you can give too much of something and it becomes less attractive, less special. And that's what I hope doesn't happen to Star Trek. So far, they've been doing a good job with it all. And fans seem to be liking all the shows on Paramount Plus. But, and I particularly am a fan of Strange New Worlds. That's my favorite of all the new series. And I like it because I think as an old school fan, I like the nods back to the original series. From the uniforms to the design of the ship to the episodic nature of the show. I just, it reminds me more than any of the other new series of the original Star Trek. And that's, with the original Star Trek still being my favorite, that's why Strange New Worlds has just grabbed me and I've been drawn into it. And I have to admit, at the same time, I love Anson Mount. We watched Hell on Wheels, and he was so good on that Western. And never in a million years did I think that after watching him on Hell on Wheels that this guy was going to become the captain of one of the new Star Trek series. And so when that was first announced, it was like, what? Wow, how cool is that? Because I was already a fan of his before he was even cast on Strange New Worlds.
So do you think then that the fact that at least Star Trek is targeting different audiences with the shows helps? Like Strange New Worlds definitely appeals to the old school fans. Lower Decks, which is by the Rick and Morty people, definitely appeals to those like me with the maturity of a 12-year-old in an adult brain. You've got Prodigy to bring in the children. Do you think it helps having a variety of different target markets then?
Big time. Absolutely. And in fact, if there's one thing I think they're doing right, it's exactly what you just said. They're creating shows that appeal to different markets and different age groups. And, the one thing that Star Trek really didn't have that Star Wars did is a show that would appeal to kids. Star Wars did Clone Wars and all these things. And Star Trek really didn't have anything like that. So I think Prodigy is a brilliant idea, and it's definitely helping bring kids into the Star Trek universe, and then they can graduate to the other shows, and watch the others as they grow older. And so I'm all for that, and I think that's been a very, very smart smart choice for CBS Paramount.
Yeah, I love the Prodigy show because for me, I have students whose parents are huge Star Trek fans. And so the kids will watch their Prodigy and then they'll come and see me the next week and it'll be like, did you see what Murph did? You know, look at Rocket Top. Like they get so into it and they love it so much. And then they're like, we know why you like it so much yourself. So for me, I kind of like that they did target a kids show finally, because I mean, I was an infant when TNG came out.
Yeah.
You know, Enterprise was the first one I got to see as it aired, because Voyager I caught half aired and half in syndication like the other three. So, and the animated series, I didn't get the sense it was really targeting a family audience as much.
Right. Yeah, no, I think they've been making some smart decisions when it comes to the Star Trek franchise here lately. And, you know, it's always interesting to me. It doesn't surprise me anymore when I hear something about a new Star Trek series in development, because it's like, oh, okay, well, let's see what that one's like, you know, because now it's a whole new world than the world in which I grew up in, which was, you know, there was one Star Trek and that was all there was.
So would you say if Section 31 comes along, like they said with Michelle Yeoh, that would be definitely another good move?
Absolutely. I completely think that. I mean, because that's a whole nother aspect of Star Trek that hasn't really totally been explored in the other shows. So I'm all for that. Yeah, absolutely all for that.
And Dan is correcting me here. He's like, apart from the Mirror Universe Vulcans, we did see bearded Vulcans in the form of Spock in the motion picture, which is true.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. I only saw the motion picture once, so I don't really remember much of it. So on a slightly different tangent, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced starting a fan group?
Oh, boy. Well, for many years, I was a part of other local groups here in the Denver, Colorado area where I'm based out of. And those were more of a social group where you would get together with people, you know, and we'd watch the episodes and things of that nature. And it was when I went and saw Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I absolutely loved the first movie, even though I recognize the areas of it that people complain about its slowness and such. But it was at that point that I decided, well, I want to start a fan club that really just focuses on that movie and talks about all the different things about it. So I did. I was 18 years old and I sat in my mom and dad's basement and typed out my first newsletter on a typewriter. And I started putting ads in what was then Starlog magazine, which was a big magazine at the time. It covered everything in the sci-fi pop culture world. And just little bits and pieces. Time happened, I started getting more members and more members. And then I got a job in a print shop, and I was able to make the newsletter look more professional. And at that point, that's when Paramount got a hold of it. And Paramount sent me a letter saying, hey, you're not licensed to do this. And I said, well, I'm just a kid in my mom and dad's basement doing this. I'm not some professional publisher. And they said, well, you know what? We've been looking around, and you have the right amount of fanaticism mixed with the right amount of professionalism that we're looking for. Why don't you fly out here and we'll talk about making you the official Star Trek fan club? And so I did. That happened. I got a contract. We signed it. And just things just kept snowballing. We got more members. The thing became more professional looking. And yeah, I mean, over the years, we were publishing the Star Trek Communicator magazine at its peak. We were doing between 400 and 500,000 copies of that magazine that went out into all of the newsstands and the bookstores, and then was sent out to all the members that were in the fan club, over 100,000 people. And so, and the reason I mentioned Star Wars off and on is because I did Star Wars too. So we were doing Star Wars and Star Trek right here out of Aurora, Colorado, and had a 40,000 square foot warehouse where we carried all of the product for both of these franchises, and we'd sell them through the catalogs that were inserted in the center of the magazines. but yeah, it was a challenge. You know, it's not something that happened overnight. I mean, I started as a kid essentially, and it built over years and years of just hard work and blood, sweat, and tears, and not making any money really for a long time until it got to a point where it was actually financially successful. And so, I'm 60 years old now, and I still work with a lot of the different Star Trek licensees now as just somebody that they call me up and ask me certain questions and things as a consultant. So Star Trek's been a part of my life since I was probably 13 years old, and I've had a great run with it. I love everything about Star Trek.
Well, on that we can definitely agree. When I was homeschooling, I used to have the Sci-Fi Channel would run the original series, Next Generation, DS9, and Voyager all in a row, and I'd have that on while I was doing my homeschool courses because no one was at home. So,
yeah. And you were still able to get good grades on your courses, huh?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of Star Trek references in my essays, though.
Oh, well, that's all right. It's okay.
So, what Trek-specific conventions or events have you attended? Like, there's Star Trek Las Vegas, there's the Star Trek cruises, there's Shore Leave, there's Vulcan. Like, which ones that are Trek-specific have you been to?
Man, I think I've been to all of them. Definitely, I was on the very first Star Trek cruise. That dates me. I was Volcon. I've been to most of the Creation Las Vegas Star Trek conventions. Those were always so much fun because they were always so big and they had so much going on there. Let's see, what else? Shore Leave. Been to Shore Leave. There was right here in my own backyard was StarCon, which is a convention that was held in Denver. And just a year ago, they did their very last one here. And that was bittersweet because I grew up going to those conventions and I got to meet many of the Star Trek cast that would come to those. I've been to so many, Eve, to be honest. I mean, I really have. I mean, if I go back to the time when I was 18 years old to today, if you gave me a list, I could say, yeah, been there, no, been there. I've been to so many over the years.
That I'm jealous at this point. For me, I've only been to the Calgary Expo, which is just a general like comic expo.
Expo, yeah. Well, that's kind of what's taken over now, though, is all of these big comic pop culture expos. They're the days of the Star Trek conventions being kind of the king of the hill is kind of gone now because now you've got so much out there in the world of entertainment that fits into these sci-fi pop culture comic book, action adventure, that they're all kind of combined into one thing. And there's all these fan expos now everywhere, and they're huge. We have one here in Denver now, the Denver Fan Expo. I mean, there's over 100,000 people that come to that. So it's the old days. That's why I say, I'm still old school, and that I remember when we were doing the official Star Trek fan club, we would have a convention listing in every issue of the newsletter. And I mean, it was full every, it was bi-monthly, and every 2 months you wouldn't believe how many different conventions there were. And they were all Trek centric conventions. They were all just Star Trek conventions. And the idea of all these kind of fan expos now is really something that's modern, because back in the day it was Star Trek and Star Trek only. And that there was one happening almost every weekend somewhere around the world.
That's incredible to know, because I've pretty much only grown up with the big fan expos in the major cities. And then, of course, I live close to Vulcan, Alberta. So there's the Volcom there, which is purely Star Trek. But yeah, I really only know the big expos. So
yeah. And that's really the way the world is now. I mean, and they attract a lot of people. Most of them I follow here, and they get over 100,000 people at these things. So they're big. They're huge.
Yeah. Dan Leckie says, do you think Star Trek has more competition nowadays compared to the 60s, 70s, 80s?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I mean, you have all these streaming services now. I mean, Star Trek's even competing with itself with all these different shows, you know. One show is competing against another show, you know. It's like, which is your favorite? Well, I don't know. How many are there now, you know? But so yeah, there's no question about it that you know, there was a time when Star Trek was it. That was king of the hill, and then Star Wars came along and that challenged. You know, it built a whole huge fan base as well. But today, there's just so much thrown at us through all the different cable channels, the streaming services, you know, the movies. Yeah, it's the competition today for Star Trek is far greater than it's ever been in its existence.
Do you think that's a good thing for the franchise?
Well, I think it makes them have to put out good Star Trek because you know, they can't just put out Star Trek for the sake of Star Trek because there's many other things that people will watch. Excuse me. And I think that if it's not good, they stand the chance of not being able to keep doing it. So I think the competition makes them just have to keep doing better and better Star Trek. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. The only downside to it is that there's so much out there that it could get lost or ignored, and I would hate to see that.
Kind of like we're starting to see a bit of the oversaturation of Marvel movies now that Disney's taken over. And I love Marvel, don't get me wrong, but it's like there's so many of them. Which can you go see and in what order?
Yeah, see, and I think Marvel's a good example. I think you made a good example of that. Yeah, it's there's just so much out there now, and I would like to see Star Trek just stay with what they've got now and develop it and work on it and not keep launching brand new things here constantly. You know, I mean, I know we were all thinking we might get another movie, and now that looks like that's in limbo or maybe never going to or not going to happen. So I don't know what's happening with the movie franchise, but as far as TV goes, you know, they're doing good work on the stuff that runs on the Paramount Plus streaming channel.
In that sense, I'd almost think it's like DC, where DC TV shows do really well, but their movies lately have been hit and miss.
That's
Whereas
right.
Marvel's the consistent movie franchise, although it's getting a little much, but the Marvel shows are just not making it.
Well, yeah, you're right. And actually, you know, in Marvel, as I said, is a good example. I think people, you know, what they have to be careful of is that, as I said earlier here, that people might start to grow too full of it. You know, I mean, as I said, you know, you might love some sort of food that's your favorite, but if you keep putting it in front of you and you keep eating it and eating it, and at some point you're going to go, oh gosh, I don't want anymore. You know, I can't eat anymore. It might even start to turn you off. So I think that with all of these franchises, whether it be Star Trek or Star Wars or Marvel, that they have to be careful not to do too much that makes people start to just become blasé about them, and especially if they're not putting out quality stuff and it's just kind of middle of the line quality. I think they're going to start to see a lack of interest, and then some of these things will get canceled. So Star Trek needs to be smart about how many shows they're putting out there.
I definitely agree with that, because it's making me think of when I got one of my teenager jobs at Tim Hortons, which is probably the most famous donut chain.
Oh, yeah.
And one of my students just got a job there, and she was saying, they let us eat all the donuts we want for free. And I said, they did that when I worked there too. I said, do you know why? And she goes, no. I said, because give it a month and you're going to be so sick of donuts, you'll never eat a donut again.
That is exactly what I'm saying. What you just said, exactly the same thing. You know, if you keep shoving Star Trek down their throat and you keep putting it out and out more and more, you know, at some point people are going to say, oh, geez, you know, it doesn't. I've had enough. I don't want any more. Or they start to just, it's not special anymore. You know, it's kind of like it just becomes, it's like, oh, there's another Star Trek. Okay. You know, I mean, I can remember back in the day when each of these Star Trek films would come out with the original cast. my gosh, the anticipation and the buildup was part of the fun of waiting to find out, well, what's the next one about? Is it going to be the whole cast back again? And then, and then when the Next Generation ended and they started talking about doing them in the films, then you started wondering, well, what's that going to be about? So, I mean, this time period that would make you wait and grow in anticipation and excitement, and little things would come out here and there that would get you just, excited about what's coming down the pike. That to me seems kind of gone now, and that makes it seem less special to me, and that saddens me.
Do you think that could be because we do live in sort of an instant gratification type society where, I mean, if I want to watch anything, all I have to do is click on and I can watch it whenever, wherever, pause it, rewatch it, the whole 9 yards. I go to my microwave, I push the popcorn button because I don't want to punch in the timing. Do you think it could be a result of that kind of society?
I do, Eve. I think that's exactly what I think we live in a society where we have instantaneous gratification. We get stuff right as, we're living in the internet age, I mean, when I started running the official Star Trek fan club, before it was even official, there was no internet. You couldn't go on the internet and find out new information about what's happening and such. And so that made the newsletter that much more important, because I had the direct line and connection to the producers in the studio and the actors. And so it was in the newsletter. They would find out more information about what the next movie is going to be about, what's happening with the franchise and such. But now today, it's just like, and there's so many different websites that give out information and such. And I think, everybody's just expects things instantaneously. And I think it does make things less special. I keep using that word special because I don't see it as special as it once was.
All right. And question, he said, how did you end up appearing in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace?
Oh, wait, this is a Star Trek show, right?
It is.
Yeah, but there's fans of both. I love Star Wars and Star Trek. So, hey, we're out there. I was running the official Star Wars fan club, publishing the Star Wars Insider magazine, which is still out there today. And I was invited to come over to the set of Phantom Menace. It was shooting outside of London. And they offered me an opportunity to have a cameo in the movie. And they said if I come over, they would measure me for my own costume and such. And so I flew over, did all of that. And then, and that, I mean, that's really kind of how it all happened. I mean, I got on the set, and George Lucas was there, and they basically told me what I need to do, and had marks on the ground, showing me where I had to run out and grab the reins of this beast that I was grabbing. I had no idea what it was, because, the magic of ILM, there was nothing there. I was having to imagine what it was as I ran out there and grabbed the reins of this thing. And then I was supposed to pull it and take it off screen. And I remember asking the assistant director, I said, what is this thing that I'm grabbing? And he said, well, imagine a cross between a chicken and a dinosaur. And he says, and that's what you're grabbing. And so I just imagined a giant chicken, and so I didn't get to know what it looked like until I saw the movie with everybody else. And it was cool. I was just glad I didn't end up on the cutting room floor. And so really that's how it happened. And then I was over there for 3 weeks. So when I wasn't doing, and it's amazing because that one little bit, I had to be on set for many, many days because they were shooting different angles. So I had to be there for days to do that. But when I wasn't doing that, my primary job was to go over there and interview all the cast and the crew for the movie, for episode 1, so that I could, when I came back, I'd have a library of interviews that I could pull when I needed them to run and publish into the Star Wars Insider magazine. And I did that with the other franchise too. I mean, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, I went out, spent time on the set, did interviews with a lot of different people, came back. Lord of the Rings, I did Lord of the Rings as well. That went to New Zealand, spent a week and a half down there doing the same thing. So it that's how that happened. I was invited to come out and to have a basically I think they initially thought I would just be an extra, and then it turned into a cameo. So I'm not complaining.
Okay, I got to ask because you mentioned Star Trek 4, and Dan Leckie's going to laugh at this one because he knows I'm a fan of the character. Did you get to meet Kirk Thatcher?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, Punk Boy. Yeah, no, Kirk is such a fun guy. He's a hoot. Yeah, I did get to meet Kirk, and he's a wonderful guy and talented individual. And I love following him on Facebook because he has all kinds of fun things he does. But yes, I met Kirk. I sure did.
So then I'm guessing you liked his return in Picard, where we had a mirror scene.
That was that. See, and I didn't see that coming, so that was a surprise to me. And I love that. I thought that was okay. That's the kind of stuff I love, where you're pulling things from the past and bringing them in, so that we see the connection between this universe and that one. I love that. I think that's fantastic.
I will admit, when they were on the bus, I'm thinking Star Trek 4, please, please, please let him be there. And then him doing I just really like this song.
I know. No, I thought it was brilliant. They did such a good job with that. And that was a fun tie-in back to Star Trek 4. It really was.
So since we brought up Star Wars, other than Star Wars, Star Trek, what other franchises or fandoms do you really enjoy? Like, would be among your top?
Well, Star Trek and Star Wars would be at the top of the list. As I said, I did Lord of the Rings, and I love the Lord of the Rings films. And then I actually am a fan of Back to the Future. I did Back to the Future as well, and spent time out on the set of Back to the Future Part 3. And that was a fun one to do. And I'm still a fan of the Back to the Future movies. But are you talking about just things that I've worked on, or things that I'm just a fan of on my own?
Fan of, not necessarily worked on. You're a fan of.
I like I when it comes to sci-fi, I'm kind of old school. I like the old things. I still haven't seen the new Avatar. I didn't care for the first movie very much. Just didn't speak to me. So I don't know when I'll get around to seeing this new one. I've been hearing good things about it, But yeah, I'm a history buff as well. So my interests now have kind of gone from sci-fi to history. In fact, that's why behind me right there, you can see what's an antique clock of Abraham Lincoln. I'm a Abraham Lincoln fanatic, and I love everything about Abraham Lincoln. I studied him and read his works and collect things about him. And of course, I love the fact that he was on Star Trek. That's another cool thing. So I would say if I had to pick my favorites, it would be Star Trek, Star Wars, and Back to the Future. I still love all of those a great deal.
How do you feel about the Orville, Seth MacFarlane's take on Star Trek?
Well, now that's a very interesting thing, and my good friend Mark, he's good. He's buddies with a couple of the cast members on the show. Everybody here might be surprised to hear this, but do you know I have never watched an episode of that? I have yet to watch an episode, and I know everybody that I know that watches that show and loves it says to me, it's more Star Trek than Star Trek. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yes. And I said, well, is it a comedy? Is it a drama? And I think it started out more as a comedy, but then kind of developed into a drama. So I've got on my list now, because I've been scolded a million times, to do a marathon and catch up watching the Orville, because it looks interesting, and I have never heard anybody say a bad thing about it. And they've said, if you like Star Trek, you'll like the Orville. And as I said, I can't tell you, several people have now said to me, it's more Star Trek than the modern Star Treks, actually.
I won't give you spoilers, but I will say there is a lot of Star Trek alumni in that show. And we've got
behind the scenes, you mean? Yeah, yeah.
No, in the show as actual characters.
In the show? Oh, really?
Yeah, you will see John Billingsley. You'll see Robert Picardo. You'll see the lady who played Cassidy Yates is a regular.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's got Seth MacFarlane has brought in a lot of Star Trek alumni.
That's very cool. Well, I know Seth MacFarlane was a Star Trek fan, so
He was an Enterprise, I believe.
yeah, yep, that's right. And so it's yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny. I can't tell you. It's interesting. The reaction I get when people, because I get that. I've had people ask me that all the time. So, well, what do you think of the Orville? And when I tell them I've never watched it, they're like, what? They can't believe it. So, what is it? 3 seasons now, right?
Yeah, and I would say it's got a little bit more of a TNG feel, so episodic, but with some ongoing story threads. But like I would say, it would be compared closely to TNG. So I mean, you'll get the humor, you get the drama. They do tackle the serious stuff, but yeah, I will say you won't regret it. And the number of Star Trek alumni and Star Trek references in there, it's just amazing.
Well, I think the highest compliment that can be made for that show is that many of my friends who are dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fans absolutely love it. And as I've said, they tell me it's more Star Trek than some of the new Star Trek shows. So I really do need to watch it. And I have it on my list. It's probably one of the next things I'm going to do is kind of binge watch the episodes. You know, when it first came out, I thought it was kind of a comedy, more lighthearted. Was it in the beginning?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was more comedic, but it was definitely a more thoughtful type of comedy than Seth MacFarlane's usual offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're familiar with Family Guy and American Dad, the humor there tends to be a little more low-hanging fruit, a little more, playing to the lower common denominators, like people with my maturity level. But no, it starts out comedic, but it starts getting more and more serious. I will say that. And they keep the comedy at a level that's classy.
Cool. That's really cool.
It's intelligent comedy. It's not, there's the odd silly joke, but he gets away from some of his bathroom humor and stuff like that. You don't see that in there. It's
good. That's good. I love the look of the show. I've got several friends that are working on it and have worked on it from in the behind the scenes. And I almost feel a little bit ashamed that I haven't watched it yet. So I got to get on that and watch it, because I have a feeling that I would be a big fan of it once I do.
From what you've said, like I say, you're not going to regret it. It's just a fun romp and definitely has a lot of callbacks. And John Halliday, who's actually a friend of mine in the same Star Trek club as me, he just typed in Tim Russ was on an episode, which is
wow.
Yeah, we had Tim Russ. And then he also said Charlize Theron and Liam Neeson from Star Wars
have actually been on the show. Have been on the.
Oh, yeah.
Orville?
Yeah.
Really?
The Orville is like a who's who of nerd fandom,
because the Orville, I mean, those are too big. Those two that you just mentioned, those are big movie stars. So it's amazing that they would appear on a television show. That's really impressive.
Yeah. And Dan Leckie's asking, do you have a favorite alien race in Star Trek?
That's a good question. I would have to say that of all the alien races that I have seen on Star Trek, I'm probably partial. Well, I like the Gorn. I don't know why. I like the Gorn. The old Gorn was so campy and funny that I just, I love the Gorn back in the day. And then, and I love how they used them in Strange New Worlds. The Gorn attacked and such. And I just think that they can be a really creepy. The other one I would have to say would be the Borg. I mean, the Borg, especially when they were first introduced in The Next Generation, they were really creepy because you couldn't negotiate with them. So, I mean, they were just, resistance is futile, we're taking you over. I mean, it was, they were one of the creepiest of all the alien races I think I've ever seen on Star Trek. And when they were first introduced in The Next Generation, that was I remember how how much attention that they got. And now, I hear passing references to, resistance is futile. They don't even have to say it's from Star Trek and everybody knows what it's referring to. That's how, ingrained in our popular culture the Borg have become. So yeah, of all of them, I think my least favorite. Those were my favorites. My least favorite. I was never very keen on the Ferengi. They just didn't. They didn't float my boat for some reason. Although I love Quark. Quark was good. I never had any problems with Quark, but yeah, I don't know. The Ferengi just didn't do it for me.
I have to say what you said about the Gorn. It reminds me of growing up with the 1990s version of the Ninja Turtle movies where it's guys in rubber suits.
Yes.
Versus now we've got the digital Ninja Turtles.
That's right. That's right.
And so when I first saw the Gorn, because of course I saw that in syndication, I'm like, oh, gee, it's a Godzilla knockoff in a pizza shirt. Like,
yeah. It's like, well, that's a guy in a rubber suit. That's not hard to figure out,
Yeah.
And he moves so slow, and I just think,
And then I have to say with the Gorn in Strange New Worlds, I'm almost getting callbacks to Gene Roddenberry's and is it Andromeda with the Magog?
Yeah, right. Andromeda.
Because the way the one character describes how they breed inside you and what they do to you, and my first thought was it reminds me a lot of the Magog.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
and now they're interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean the Gorn and Borg I like because I think they're creepy. And they're very dangerous. They're not to be fiddled with, and so that's and if I'm getting to talk about aliens right now, my one beef especially with Discovery is I did not like the look of the new Klingons. They looked like guys, they looked like people wearing masks. They didn't look like they were real. And I just when I first saw them, I thought, I mean, that looks like some guy just flipped over a big mask over his face, and I remember thinking, geez, how did that get past the producers and the writers? I thought that they just, I don't know. They didn't, I wasn't won over by the new look of the Klingons. I think that you agree, or you've heard some other, by the way you're laughing.
A little bit. This has a weird connection to me, but I remember when the Klingons first showed up, I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, okay, I get how they described the smooth forehead Klingons being our later Klingons. I totally get that tie-in because there was makeup, so they had to play it off. I'm like, I can just see what the comment boards are going to be about. I hate the new Klingons. And I won't say who for privacy reasons because I don't want to spoil the family's privacy, but one of my piano students has a close relative who is one of those new Discovery Klingons.
Oh, gosh.
And she's too young to actually see the show, but she asked me if I could show a picture of the character that this relative plays. So I showed her a picture and she goes, holy, he's ugly.
Well, they are, and they just, to me, they look like a person wearing a mask. It doesn't look real to me.
To me, they almost look like shaved Jem'Hadar.
They do, actually. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. That's very true.
John says that Charlize Theron and Liam Neeson were in A Million Ways to Die in the West with Seth MacFarlane. So I guess that would be the connection as to how they got in there.
All right, cool. Very cool. I'm sure he knows everybody in Hollywood, so... I wouldn't surprise me if he asked so-and-so if he'd make an appearance on my show.
And Dan says, how did you feel about the Gorn in Enterprise then?
I liked it. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it. I mean, I think the Gorn, every way they have portrayed the Gorn from the original series right up to the latest, I have actually liked. I don't have any issues with the way they portrayed them. And in Enterprise, I didn't have any problems with that either. So I never really stopped to think about who my favorite aliens were. But I guess I have to say it because even though he's one of the main characters, but I've always liked the Vulcans. I thought the Vulcans were a great race of aliens and great characters. And I still think, though, as far as I'm concerned, I have never seen anybody, and maybe this is because he originated, but I have never seen anybody portray a Vulcan with that kind of unemotional, just amazing presence that Leonard Nimoy had. He is I mean, he originated it. And if you go back to, the original pilot, you see him smile, when he's touching the flowers and they stop making the noise and such. But, and as he grew, and as they started to work on his character, but I have always liked the Vulcans. And, Mark Leonard was a great Vulcan. He was great. Serac was always a good character. And I loved him when he came back in the movies. I'm a fan of the Vulcans as well.
So did you enjoy then Spock's movement from being like the serious, stone-faced, coldly logical Vulcan? I mean, over time we saw him as he got older, he kind of softened out a bit and he became more tempered in his approach. So did that also work for you?
I like just about anything that Leonard Nimoy did as the character of Spock, but I didn't like it as much as the portrayal of Spock from the original show. I remember when he came back in The Next Generation and all the excitement about, oh my gosh, we're going to get to see Leonard Nimoy as Spock in Next Gen. And it had the whole Romulan twist thing and everything. But for me, I just personally, I just love the way he how would I want to say it? I just love the way that he delivered the lines. The look on his face, the raised eyebrow when he would, go off on something, and the repertoire between him and McCoy. And I just think that Leonard Nimoy in the original series was the quintessential Spock. He was the best Spock has ever been. And I like Spock better in the original series than I've ever liked him in anything he ever came into after that. He just, he did become less Vulcan-like, I think, I guess I would say, as we see him throughout the years being portrayed in whether it's the movies or new shows. And I've just never seen anybody, even though there's been great portrayals, from others who have played Vulcans and Spock, as we were talking earlier. Nobody has yet, in my opinion, equaled Leonard Nimoy's portrayal of Spock in the original show.
I can completely understand that because, I mean, for me, Spock was before my time, but he was still the first, Leonard Nimoy's was still the first iteration I've ever seen. So
that's right. But it's funny because other people in the original series did. I mean, I would just mention Mark Leonard, but Amok Time, there were some great portrayals of Vulcans, T'Pring and T'Pau and such. And I don't know. Leonard Nimoy was one of a kind, and as much as I do love, Peck's portrayal of Spock in Strange New Worlds, and I think he's the best so far that have portrayed a young Spock. I really do think that Leonard Nimoy, nobody's ever topped him as far as, and when it comes to even some like the Savick, I mean, Kirstie Alley, God rest her soul, who just passed away. Kirstie Alley is still my favorite of all the Savicks, although I love what Robin Curtis did with the character after that. Kirstie Alley just had that, I don't know, there was just something about the way she delivered her lines, the looks on her faces. I love that Savick from Wrath of Khan.
For me, I'd compare it to Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin, and followed by Dan Castellaneta in the second one. And then they brought back Robin Williams. To me, as a 90s kid, like nobody could top Robin Williams as genie. Like Will Smith, even, he's a great actor, loved Fresh Prince, but he's just not Robin Williams.
No, Robin Williams was one of a kind. And you're right. I mean, he was the essence of genie in those Aladdin films. And so no one ever was able to top that. You know?
I think it's kind of nice when we get an actor like that, where they're just so iconic to the role that it's, we also just recently lost Louise Fletcher. And I mean,
she was so good.
Nobody else could be Kai Wynn, I don't think.
No, absolutely right. No, we've lost a lot of great actors. I mean, it really wounded me when Nichelle Nichols passed away. I was a good friend with Nichelle and known her for so many years. And when she passed, that one was a difficult one, a hard one. when she passed away. And so yeah, and Leonard Nimoy was that took me down for a couple of days because I was really, I know, you just think to yourself, they'll just be around forever, you know. And then suddenly you realize, oh, they're human. They do die, you know. And so it's yeah, it's kind of a hit to you to realize that, well, they're not going to be around forever. That they're, and you know, now what, we only have 3 of them left. We have what, Kirk, Chekhov, and Sulu are the ones that are left. And I think William Shatner is going to live forever, quite frankly.
Yeah, I've said the same thing.
When he's 90 years old and he's going up into space, I mean, crying out loud, that guy, you know, I watched him on an episode of Expedition Unknown where he was diving with sharks and such, and I'm thinking, this guy is, you know, at 100 years old, he's going to be doing God knows what, you know. I've never seen anybody that has such a amazing lust for life, and he's able to do so many different things.
He makes me think of Betty White in that case.
Absolutely, exactly. She almost made it to 100.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched Golden Girls as a kid, and
Yeah.
Betty White was just always hilarious to me.
Oh.
So when you say live forever, she's like one of those ones that you think is gonna live forever, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a sec.
Yeah, it's a shock to your system because you think, oh, well, I thought they were going to be around forever, and then you realize, oh my gosh, you know. I mean, I didn't even realize that, you know, Kirstie Alley was in her 70s. That just kind of hit me because I did the very first interview with Kirstie Alley for Wrath of Khan. I interviewed her months before the movie even came out. I hadn't even seen a picture. I didn't even know what she looked like as the character of Saavik. And when I interviewed her, she had just recently moved from Wichita, Kansas to Hollywood when she got the role of Saavik. And she was kind of this giggly young girl, you know, oh, how excited. I always wanted to play Spock's daughter and everything. And then when I heard that she had passed away, a week or 2 ago, and I heard how old she was, I was like, well, wow, has that much time gone by? When I interviewed this young actress that she hadn't done anything, and she came out to Hollywood and was just getting into playing the role of Saavik. And, you know, I didn't even know what her character would look like. So yeah, it's, you know, you're reminded every day as some of these people from your past pass away that, you know, be careful to not forget that these people are human too, and that they come and go just like all of us.
When you mentioned Kirstie Alley, it's kind of funny because for me, the first thing I ever saw her in was those Look Who's Talking movies that she did.
Yeah.
And I recall in the third one, and I didn't know what she was talking about until I got older and saw Star Trek, but there was the one where she's dressed as an elf, and the kid's like, what are you, an elf? And she's like, no, I'm a Vulcan. She's like a little death grip, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And then I saw the Star Trek movies, and I'm like, that's what that was referring to.
That's right. Well, you know what's funny, Eve, is that what's funny to me is that, see, since I was first introduced to her via Star Trek, I still think of her as Saavik. But she did so many other things after that, like those movies you referred to, or like Cheers. You know, she came on board and was on Cheers for several seasons. And that's what most people remember her for. In fact, I saw even some articles and stories on the news talking about her passing, and they hardly even mentioned Star Trek. It was like just a passing thought. What she was known for was everything that came after that. And so, yeah, it just strikes me as she had a big career after Star Trek, and she was quite popular.
Kind of the opposite of poor Kirk Thatcher, because I saw an interview with him a while ago, and he said, no matter how much I've done, I'll always be punk on the bus to everybody.
That's because he was so good in that role.
Yeah.
You know, that moment in that movie gets probably some of the biggest laughs of anything in that. And that's saying something, because there were a lot of laughs in that one.
There was.
But that one gets the biggest laughs.
So Dan says, speaking of the original series, what's a favorite episode of that show?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a very special episode, and I've talked about it before. It was the first one that I ever saw. And it's not one of the better episodes. I mean, if I was to put on a shelf my favorite of the good episode, City on the Edge of Forever, Amok Time, the Doomsday Machine. I like Devil in the Dark. There's so many different episodes that truly are good episodes, but the one episode that made the most impact on me and made me a Star Trek fan was the episode Plato's Stepchildren. And as some of the people who might be watching this know or don't know, I'm a little person. I'm 4'2" tall. And growing up, was growing up different in a world where, kids can make fun of others that aren't quite normal. And I've told this story before, but it's what got me into Star Trek. And I was coming home from junior high, walking home from school. It was about a 4-block walk to my house. I think I was about 13 years old. And there's these two kids walking along with me, and they were just being really cruel. They were calling me shrimp, and they were making fun of me. And so by the time I got home, I was in tears. And as I walked in the door, my brother, who's 3 years older than me, he was sitting there watching a Star Trek rerun. And lo and behold, just happened to be Plato's Stepchildren. And I had not had any interest in Star Trek prior to this. I had never really wanted to watch it. But for some reason that day I decided I would. And so I came in, I sat down next to him, and I started watching that show. And lo and behold, what happens? But I see a little person, Alexander, on the show who looks kind of like me. And I'm thinking, what is this? And all of a sudden I see him sitting there talking to Captain Kirk. And he says to Kirk, what's it like where you come from? And Kirk looks at him and says, Alexander, where I come from, size, shape, or color makes no difference. And I mean, after the day I had just had, I thought, wow, what must that be like to be in a world where you're not judged by what's on the outside. You're judged by the content of your character and who you are and what you can do. And that just blew my mind on that day I watched that. And then at the end of the episode where he gives that look and Kirk says, we've got a little visitor, Scotty, and he gets to beam up to the Enterprise. And man, I was sold. After that, I thought, I want to live in that time. I want to go up and be on the Enterprise. And that episode, that won me over. I just was like, I became such a huge Star Trek fan. I came home from school, watched it every day. And that's what led to my interest in Star Trek from then on after. And one of the special moments I had was I went out to LA one time to interview William Shatner at his office. And I got to sit there in his office privately, him and I just sitting next to each other. And I got to tell him that story. And when I told him that, I could see his eyes well up, and he was like, oh my God, Dan. He goes, that's an amazing story. He says, I got goosebumps hearing you tell that story. And so I got to, full circle kind of thing. I got to go out and tell the actor who was in that scene that so changed my life about how important that moment was to me and how Star Trek literally changed my life, literally gave me a whole new world to explore and set me on a career direction, personal direction, everything. And so when I talk to people about what's my favorite episode, well, that would have to be it. It wasn't a great episode, but it had a lot of special meaning to me for those reasons.
I can actually really respect that. Dan's going to sit in the background here, and he's probably either going to cringe or laugh because one of my favorite episodes is Statistical Probabilities in Deep Space Nine, and the follow-up episode, which I forget the title, where Dr. Bashir is working with these genetically enhanced yet genetically damaged people. And for me, seeing what Dr. Bashir was doing, trying to engage them and meeting them on their level, and he wasn't treating them like they were crazy, that kind of sparked an interest in working with people who have cognitive and behavioral and other issues for myself, and trying to reach them in a way they understand. And the scene where they all start singing together, because I teach music, I have always said that, when you're dealing with people who are even nonverbal, music can become their voice.
Absolutely.
So for me, like the representation in Star Trek thing, whether some people say controversial or not, I mean, they did try, to be fair, based on times. And then I was talking to my best friend who she herself is an adult with cerebral palsy. So she's confined to a wheelchair. She has she has a care aid to do everything because she can't. And she said to me, she's like, does Star Trek have people in wheelchairs? And I'm like, yes. I said, we've got Melora in Deep Space Nine. I said, we've got Invigilator Aurelio, played by Kenneth Mitchell. And they've even developed, from what I heard, they actually developed his wheelchair specifically for him, for his ALS. I said, if there's anything Star Trek has always tried to do, it's made it seem that those who are different are just normal and have a place in society. And she's like, I can't believe that. Like, she was totally shocked. So when
inclusivity, that's the main thing about Star Trek. And, that was also another aspect to that story I just told you, Eve, was that it was shortly after that I got to go to my very first Star Trek convention here in Denver, and it was StarCon, which I had mentioned. And that's how long it's been around. And I got to go to that convention. And, when I went there, it was like a breath of fresh air because nobody treated me differently. Nobody looked at me or stared at me. Everybody just acted like I was just like everybody else. And I thought, wow. So really, there is a modern day world that's like Star Trek, and it's called a Star Trek convention because these people, they don't judge me for the fact that I'm different in appearance. They just are interested in me as me. And so I found the Star Trek conventions to be a really amazing place to just be me and not be judged by what's on the outside. Pardon me.
That's okay. You really hit like something, like I say, that I'm passionate about here. You really hit something on the head for me. So just the representation and how Star Trek really does embrace everybody. Like, I recall seeing the trials where Patrick Stewart's got the hairpiece on and then does it. And somebody asked, I don't know if it was an interview or what, but somebody had asked him about, well, haven't they cured male pattern baldness in the future? And he's like, in the future, nobody cares.
There you go. I remember that answer of his. And that's perfect. That's the perfect way to look at it.
And we have Geordi with his visor and later his bionic eyes. It doesn't stop him from being an engineer. It's not a solution.
I have to be honest, I've been blessed in my life because I got the opportunity to go out many times to Paramount Pictures lot and interview Gene Roddenberry. And I got to know Gene very well. He became a friend of mine. And I got to tell him that story and other stories. And, he would tell me about stories of handicapped people who he would meet at conventions that would come up and tell him about something that they had seen in an episode that inspired them and gave them hope and courage and such. So, there's countless stories of people who are handicapped who have found Star Trek to be an inspiration. And that carries on right through to today, to the latest shows. Star Trek is a world where everybody's welcome. And I think that it's, it changed my life. And, people might think a TV show. And I'm like, yes, a TV show literally changed my life. And that was Star Trek. And I'll never, I'm grateful for the fact that I think that, I don't know what it was, but, fate had me come home that day, sit down, because I hadn't done it prior to that, sit down to watch what my brother was watching. And fate said, I'm going to put that episode on so you can see that, because that was integral to changing my life ever after. Had it been another episode, I might have thought it was cool, but it might not have spoken to me personally. So I find it still, I still find it special that one day that was the one that I got to watch.
What you're saying now kind of reminds me, earlier we mentioned Futurama being a love story to Star Trek in a lot of ways.
right.
And there's that one thing where Leela, I believe it is, asks Fry, what is it with you and this Star Trek? Like, why are you so obsessed? And he goes, because when I was truly alone and I felt like I had no friends and nobody understood me, I could put on Star Trek and I had friends and I had like my place. Of course, I'm not giving the exact quote, but paraphrasing here.
Yeah, right.
And you're reminding me of that, because the one thing I've seen being in fandom is meeting a lot of people who, you know, didn't generally fit in somewhere else. I didn't generally fit in, and you know, but in Star Trek we all fit in.
Absolutely, and I think that's the magic and the beauty of Star Trek, is that it's a universe. It portrays a universe where everybody has a place. But what I find even is special is that at these conventions, you know, specifically these Star Trek conventions, and they were so much in the past that you'd see people of all kinds, all types, you know, a variety of different handicaps, or people who just didn't fit in, you know, to normal society, whatever. And they felt comfortable being there, and everybody treated them as if they were just like everyone else. And so, you know, that was an eye-opening experience for me to go to my very first Star Trek convention, because it was one of the very first times in my life as a young person that I felt like I wasn't having people look at me and judge at me for my size. They just, you know, we'd sit there and we start talking about our favorite episodes of Star Trek. And, you know, it had nothing to do with, you know, the fact that I'm little and they're tall, or I'm white and they're black. It had nothing to do with anything of that. And I still, and you know, mentioning that, one of my all-time favorite episodes, and now I'm embarrassed because I can't remember the title of it. Maybe you can. The original series where Frank Gorshin, they had the half black, half white face. What's that one?
I don't know the title, but I know if we give Dan Leckie a second, he'll have the title.
All right.
But I know the one you mean, the black, yeah, half black and half white. And
that to me is one of the most powerful expressions of just how ridiculous racism is. You know, I'll never forget that moment when Spock says, you know, he's looking at him, he says, well, I don't see the difference. And he goes, well, what do you mean? You know, I'm black on the left-hand side. He's black on the right-hand side. And it's like, it's suddenly you watch that and you see it. It's so ridiculous that to me, that was just a very profound way to explain how ridiculous racism is. And that episode, I still think was extremely important.
Dan just got back.
That's it.
Yeah, let that be your last battlefield. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
I love that we've got Dan to be a walking concordance, because I can't do episode titles.
Yeah, I don't remember every episode title, especially from after the original show, but that was a powerful one. So
on a slightly different track, because you've been involved in Star Trek, you've been involved in Star Wars. Do you think a Star Trek? Oops.
Sorry, that was my phone.
Okay, are you okay?
Yeah, no, it just fell off my stand.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, now we got this weird Star Wars. I think that's
What's Star Wars. What's that doing on our screen?
I don't know. That just came up. There we go. Okay, it's gone.
There you go.
So do you think a Star Trek and Star Wars crossover film could work on a narrative level?
You know, it's funny. I actually brought that question up to Gene Roddenberry one time. And he said to me, he said, it's like having your two favorite soups. He says, you love this one and you love that one. But he said, if you mix them together, they don't taste very good. And he said, I don't really see this working very well by putting them together. Because I think they each have their own unique universes and their own unique place in the world. So maybe in a comic book or something that would work, but I would not. I wouldn't be in favor of that in a film myself. Others might. I don't know.
And then, which captain would you want to serve with, and why?
Well, growing up, I always admired Captain Kirk. He was always my favorite. But I think for a person who's more like me, that I will be able to have more of a intelligent conversation about the things that I love, I would have to say Picard. Because for me, Picard is he's an incredible man, incredible human being. And I think I would probably rather serve under Picard than Kirk, even though Kirk is my favorite captain. So go figure.
All right. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Boy, I can't think of it, Eve. You gave me some great questions, and we've gotten to talk about everything. You even got a little Star Wars mixed in there. So I wasn't expecting that, and I always love talking about Star Wars too. But I love doing, I get interviewed a lot more about Star Wars than I do Star Trek. So I'm always happy to talk with people about Star Trek, because Star Trek was my first love. It was the thing that brought me into the whole world of sci-fi. And that special moment I shared with you will, till the day I die, will be my favorite memory of what changed my life, and took me on a whole nother direction. So I can't think of anything else, but I'm sure happy to have had the chance to sit and chat with you for an hour here. I've enjoyed it.
Dan Leckie says, thanks so much for the interview, Dan. It's been great to watch, so thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you setting it up. It's taken a while for us to get hooked up, so I'm glad we finally made this happen. And I hope you get well, Dan.
Me too. On the other hand, I hope I've been a good host, because this is my
You've been a
first
great
time.
host, Steve. You should do this again all alone by yourself. You're great.
Thank you. All right. So on behalf of Subspace Chatter, I want to say thank you to you, Dan, for taking part in the interview. We hope that the viewers have enjoyed this video. Please remember, smash the subscribe button. That's what keeps us alive. And we'll see you next time on Subspace Chatter. Trek you later.